And we are live. It's 5 o'clock on Saturday. Another Erik Wait whiskey studies live stream. Dahmer Pass Whiskey, thanks for tuning in. And Grumpy Old Fart, thanks for tuning in. Grumpy Old Fart, excuse me, is taking a month off, but he's tuning in anyway. I think that's, uh, sorry about the coughing. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I can take a week off, take a day off, it's always good to take some time off. It actually refreshes your palate. Focus on other things, do other things. But what I like is that even though you're taking a break, you're not taking a break from my live streams. You're still tuning in. I think that's really cool. So thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know how the audio and so forth is doing. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. This is total bullshit. So I'm back on. Uh, the signal is fine, and I look in the signal and all that kind of stuff, and it's just fine. It should not be doing that, and that this has been happening every time with freaking StreamYard. And if I didn't use StreamYard, I know it wouldn't be doing that. So, but all right, give me a second. All right, I'm back, and we're back. This happens every time I go live. It's around 1 minute or so into the live stream, it cuts out. So has nothing to do with the signal. They try to tell me to hard plug in and all that crud. That's nothing to do with it. The signal is fine. There are no issues. This is a StreamYard issue. Anyway, let me pour myself something. So if you've been watching me for a while, you notice I tend to cough. I have allergies. I have respiratory issues. I'm asthmatic. And so the result is, I get kind of this, if I talk for long periods of time, I get this gravelly voice, whatever. My palate is fine. My nose is fine. I smell just fine, taste just fine, so forth. But I tend to cough a lot. And so long conversations, I'm sucking on throat lozenges. I need to drink water or a little bit of whiskey. I had taken actually 5 days off. I had been working for over a month. I was working 7 days a week. And then the exhaustion finally got to me, and I woke up with a sore throat. So I ended up taking a few days off from work. But since then, my my nose has just been clogged up. Anyway, I'm talking about my allergies, not crap. Anyway, so that's an issue. So it's fine when I'm doing regular videos because I can edit that and all that. But live streams is a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to be taking, if you didn't see the notice in the community section and on the Facebook group, I'm going to be taking more or less probably a lot of June, July, and going into August off. Reason why is I've been I was contacted a few weeks ago about a potential position, and then this last week I got an offer. I've accepted the offer. It's an outstanding offer, and so I'm starting a new job, and I'm also moving again. I've only been here a year. In mid-July, I've been here for a year, so I'm moving again, which means these 330 bottles of whiskey have to get packed, as well as my books and everything has to get moved again. Major hassle. So I figured, you know what? Because of the allergy stuff, taking some time off because of moving. I need to get settled in and all kind of stuff. Need to take some time off. I was hoping this would be my last move for the rest of my life because I really like living here. I love this house. I love living out here in the Sonoma wine country. I'm gonna take a small sip. Mm. Wow. Hey, Cheech. Peter White, Michael Hassler, Dave Belcher. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I've only been here for a year. I was only at the last place a couple of years and now I'm moving again. So this morning I woke up just as sun was coming up, and I looked over the mountains, and it was crystal, blue sky as the sun was rising up, and there was a stream of clouds. And because it was sunrise, the way the sun goes through the clouds were pink, and it was just absolutely spectacular, just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sight. And I just really was, as the coffee was brewing, I was just thinking how much I'm going to miss living here. I thought about keeping this house and getting another one. That's where I'm moving to, and you come up here on weekends and holidays, whatever. But I would it would be neglected. I wouldn't be coming up here that often. Anyway, so that being said, I've found a house that I want. It's actually up in the mountains overlooking the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. 3 bedrooms. It's got surrounded by redwood trees. It has a big deck goes out and you can oversee the Bay Area. So I'm hoping I get the house, but we'll see how that goes. Housing is a little bit of a challenge in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley, but there's a huge shift in the tech industry. A lot of CEOs are tired of the whiny, demanding people who work in tech. The CEOs are moving their businesses. So I'm predicting over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of people vacating the Silicon Valley, a lot of tech moving out. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes, which will then open up the housing market. All right. I know you didn't tune in for all that. You tune in because you're supposed to be talking about Tomatin Distillery, Tomatin whiskey. So what I am drinking tonight is, but I figured give people an update why I'm taking some time off. So one, because I'm moving, starting a new job. Second, take a break because of allergies. So what am I drinking tonight? This is, This is the Tomatin cask strength Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, aged in ex-bourbon cask, ex-Oloroso sherry cask. It's non-chill filtered, natural color. It's a non-age statement, and it's at 57.5% alcohol by volume. I think the prices range probably somewhere between $75 and $90 here in the United States. But of course, we know how that goes. The price changes are quite radical these days. So I'm a big fan of Tomatin Distillery. I visited in 2019 in studying for my video. So last weekend I posted my video on Tomatin. This little kit that I brought back from the distillery when I visited. With the bottle I wanted to, every time I go to a distillery, I like to bring back something special from the distillery that you can't get anywhere else. Distillers editions, that kind of a thing. And you can get some really amazing whiskeys out there. There's a lot more peated whiskey out there in the Highlands than you would think, because some of them, the very small production of peated whiskey, they don't distribute it. It only sells at a distillery a lot of times. So if you want a Highland peated, oftentimes you got to go straight to the distillery from some distilleries. Anyway, so what I wanted was the PX cask, Tomatin PX cask, but Scott and Bart had visited the distillery, and they did a review of the bottle from the distillery. Consequently, boom, they sold out. So when I got there, I was told, "Oh, Scott and Bart, Scotch Testimonies were here. They talked about it, and boom, suddenly they sold out." So that's what I wanted. That was the bottle I wanted. So I don't want to leave empty-handed. Still bring back something. So I brought back this little kit here, which has the 12, the 14, and the Legacy. And I think from what I've been told, Legacy is what they call it in the UK. Dulcis, meaning sweet, is what they call it here in the United States. So anyway, real nice whiskeys. These things are kind of cool. I would say for traveling, if you're going to go sneak in to go see the Maverick, which a Top Gun Maverick, which I'll probably do in the next couple of days, and you want to bring a wee dram with you in your pocket, there you go. Go watch Top Gun Maverick with a little bit of whiskey with you. All right. So, so I did my review of this and shared the history on Tomatin Distillery last week. So this live stream is going to probably go a little bit short. I don't have as many questions. Usually I like to have like 10 questions as part of the quiz. So if you didn't see the previous video, go back and watch it, because all the content in today's quiz is going to be from that. Christopher Muller, how you doing, man? He says, good stuff, a great price. I think I paid $60 about a year ago. And of course, he might not be responding to me. He might be talking to something else. Oh, of course, might be talking about that. See, it's hard to tell sometimes whether you guys are talking to each other or whether you guys are talking to me. Judith Stowell says, I love the Tomatin Dolces. Dualches? I think it's Dolces. Well, Dolces would mean sweet. Or Dolces. Yeah, the price is way up after it won the very sherry Christmas 145 pounds. Whoa, when I got my PX Distillery hand fill last month. Oh, nice. Nice. You're right. Didn't you just make a trip to the to Scotland? I think, and you think you went to Ireland as well. So yeah, I kind of wish we could meet up. I'd like to hear about your trip, where you went to, see some photos, and what you thought. I was hoping to return. So I went to Scotland in 2018, 2019, 2021, obviously COVID crap. I wanted to go back this year, but there's so much stuff going on. I was looking at going originally in July and then pushed back to September. And now I don't think I'll be going at all this year. I just got too much stuff going on. So cast strength. And yet, there's a little tingle up front, as you would expect, at 57.5. But it starts off sweet. It's like, it's funny because there's like on the fruit character, it's like this chocolate-covered black cherry note. But then there's also this nuttiness, and that's from the oxidative character of sherry cask. There's caramels and vanillas and baking spices. There's almost, if you've ever had almond roca, it's a little candy like this. There's almonds on the inside. They're wrapped up real fancy in like gold foil, and they come in their own individual little cups. And there's chocolate, and there's like almonds on the inside. It's kind of like an almond roca. If you've never had an almond roca, check it out. You'll know what I'm talking about. So one of the things I like about the potential of a sherry cask, even if they don't do, say, it isn't a sherry bomb with just the dark, dried black fruit notes, is the oxidative character of Oloroso can give you that nuttiness on the back end. So they've dialed in the sherry cask and the bourbon cask really, really well. Similar, it doesn't. I'm not saying it tastes similar necessarily, but in a similar fashion, the Glengoyne. This is the Glengoyne cask strength. I love this whiskey. I think I paid like, I don't know, $85-$90 for it. This is first fill and second bourbon, and then ex-bourbon, first fill, second fill sherry cask. And by the way in which they use the bourbon and sherry cask, they back it off the dark, dried black fruit notes and yet maintain some sherry notes to where you get that sort of nutty almond character to it. It comes across almost like the way a Fino or an Amontillado sherry cask comes across. But I absolutely love this whiskey. But this is another one. I'm not saying it tastes like it per se, but there's some similarities. There are some similarities. Now that's a 21-year-old. The development and the texture and the mouthfeel and the sort of elegance in the development in the front and the middle of the finish is much more incremental, subtle. There's much more of a distinctive transition all the way through. This is more or less sort of a kapow of sweetness up front, and then about mid-palate going into the finish is a kapow of dried notes with some nuttiness. So the transitions aren't as slowly incremental as the Glengoyne is. It's more of a boom, boom. You know what I mean? So it's a difference between, slow versus a boom. You know, I don't know how else to describe it in terms of the development on the palate. But that's kind of it. And yet, in terms of the base descriptors, very, 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 very similar. One of the challenging things, and something I'm kind of working on, is paying attention to these caskings and then memorizing that in my brain, and then calibrating that to look at the cause and effects. Okay, this is how it was aged, and this is the effect, and look for these patterns of cause and effect. If you get these certain notes and these certain notes, and this is the cause of it. There are a gazillion different little things that result in the profile of a whiskey. There's like 500 different barley varieties. There's 10 that are used. Most say it doesn't really matter which one you use. It's more of a matter of how much starch you get for producing sugar and producing alcohol. Well, there's some sources say that, others disagree with that. Some say water source doesn't matter. Some say it does. But those are small impacts in terms of the overall profile. There's obviously the size and shape of the still, the speed in which the still is run. What's the difference between this? I'm not a question I'm asking you, but I'm just throwing this out there. Hey, Keith L, how you doing? What's the difference between, because when you're talking distillation, you're talking about copper contact, right? And how much reflux there is. So think of Glenmorangie super tall still, they distill twice. Because it's so tall, only the lightest of spirits make it into the line arm and into the condenser. Okay, so short fat still, say like Macallan, it gets over fairly quickly. So they get a heavier spirit. But that's not the only thing issue. What about a super tall still versus triple distillation in a shorter still? Do you get a similar effect in triple distillation as you would to if you just had a taller still, right? Because you get by triple distilling, you're getting a lighter spirit, say like Auchentoshan, but you're sort of in a sense getting a lighter spirit also for taller distillation. So, and then this is of course just one factor. And this is the questions I have that I'm looking into. Will a super tall still with a gradual, let's say maybe even a gradual lineup, so it doesn't immediately dump, maybe more of an angled, does that give you a similar spirit to triple distillation? Because it's just a matter of the lightness of the spirit versus only lighter spirits making it over versus triple distillation. This is a question. And can you tell the difference in blind tasting? Then there's the speed at which the still is run. Glengoyne, right? Like they like to advertise, that they're patient, and they run their stills slower. So that also increases contact because it's spending more time in the still before it makes its way over because they're not running as fast, they're not running as hot. Okay, so these are gazillions of little influences on the overall profile of a spirit. Then, of course, there's the cuts, right? So, if you're only keeping the heart and you're not dipping into the tails, can that did that contribute to also a lighter spirit because you're losing some of the phenols out of the tails? So imagine if you did this, okay, now start combining these factors. How you want to dial this in. A real tall still, run real slowly, triple distilled, and only a heart cut, right? So I just named some of the lightest sense of the spirit you would get out of all those. So a real tall still, run real slow, and you only take the hearts. What's the end result of that? Think of the math. If you could do the whiskey math on that, and it would tell you what your end spirit is going to be, right? These are just thoughts that are going through my head. So I'm sort of at a point in my whiskey journey where I'm really starting to more and more dial in. I'm gonna take another sip. Ben Demon Hunter, how you doing, man? I'm sending you up. So these are just thoughts that are going through my current study. I don't know if it'll actually ever be, excuse me, applied to an actual exam or not, a blind tasting. But should I continue on in this current track, um, is that so in the at the master level with the Council of Whiskey Masters, you get a written test, an oral test, and a blind test in whiskeys. So in accurately describing a whiskey, I think being able to tell how you think it was made, what kind of casks you had, what's the structure of it, the ABV. Can you tell them between chilled filtered, non-chill filtered? Um, can you tell, does it typify a particular region of Scotland? Age, obviously, it's a huge factor. Can you get one like real close ballpark, and nailing the age on this? And so this sort of deductive reasoning and analyzing whiskeys, what I'm really doing is taking a similar methodology that I learned from Masters of Wine and Master Sommeliers in analyzing wines. Now, it's not a simple cut and paste because, but although climate impact on a whiskey has an impact on the speed in which there is an extraction from the cask. And I think if you pay attention to those factors, you can tell from a whiskey the climate of where it was from by the intensity of the extraction on the cask. So that if a whiskey seems youthful in terms of a spirit, but it has a heavy or heavier extraction from a cask, that's not, according to the age, then that heavy extraction is not by age, it's done by climate. Of course, the other factor is, and there's always more factors, is how fresh is the cask? It is a wet cask. And that's just why I'm kind of not a real fan in theory that the SWA would allow wet casks because you're more or less just pouring sherry or whatever into your whiskey. And I think that's illegit. But that's a whole nother discussion, one nother debate, and the SWA has never approached that subject. But that's another avenue of pursuing of studying. Take a bunch of bourbon cask whiskeys. Take some, let's it's just for shits and giggles, let's say 5. You got 5 samples of whiskeys. 4 are bourbon casks in which there's been a little bit of sherry. I'm talking sherry wine. Just boop with an eyedropper. This one's got 1 drop. This one's got 2 drops. This one's got 3 drops, 4 drops, whatever. And then there's one that was actually aged in bourbon and sherry cask. Can you, out of those 5, pick out which ones had just straight up sherry added to it versus the one that was actually aged in a sherry cask? I think if you were doing this where someone just dropped the sherry in it, bloop, 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 and then you had a sherry and a sherry cask finished whiskey in a glass, you could tell the difference if it was done like that, because the sherry that you're just dropping in there has not integrated into the whiskey, and so it'll be more distinct and it won't seem like it's really ingrained in the whiskey. But what if you then took bottles of bourbon cask scotches, put your incremental amounts, you say sample bottles of sherry in it, and then let them marry for 6 months. In that 6 months, that little bit of sherry has had time to integrate into the rest of the whiskey. Can you tell the difference? That's an experiment, excuse me, I would like to do, but not on my own. I would like to do this with a bunch of whiskey friends, and people who I know that I think I respect their palate. Could they tell the difference? I think Daniel Whittington would be really, really good. The Whiskey Geek, friend of Roy's, who's been on Roy's channel a bunch of times, I think would be a good candidate. But people who get this nerdy and paying this much attention to the whiskeys, I think Jeremy over at Sipper Social Club would be good because he actually plays around with adding port wines and stuff on his own to whiskeys. So I think it'd be really, really interesting. So in paying attention to the profile of a whiskey, what type of cask they are. Now, I wish I had more information. How much time in a bourbon cask? How much time in a sherry cask? So that I had more data to get an understanding of how this is arriving at the profile it has. And of course, this is a non-age statement, so that kind of throws me for a loop. Now, it's a non-age statement, but I don't pick up any youthful notes on this whiskey whatsoever. There's no greenness of spirit. There's none of that powdered sugar aspartame character that you often get in really young whiskeys. And they haven't hidden those notes in peat or a heavy dose of sherry. All right. So that's sort of what in terms of, I'm doing these videos focus on the studies of these various distilleries. If you're a member of my Facebook group, I just recently posted 2 articles. One's a summary of Scotch malt whiskey production, and the other one's on a summary of grain whiskey, Scotch grain whiskey, Scotch grain whiskey. I'll be posting another one on Irish pot still, and then one on bourbon in the very near future. And I'll be making videos based on those notes. So if you're a member of my group, you can go into, there's a file section. You can download all kinds of notes, stuff in there. There's it's called a Scotch primer. In fact, I could probably, if I did this, Facebook. Oh, I gotta have to log in. I'm not gonna log in. Maybe I can. Hold on. I'm gonna see if I can put a link to the articles. So if you go to Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, you go to the top of the menu, scroll over to the right, you go to the file section. There's a long list of things that I've written over there in time. So I'm gonna right now. I'm gonna post a link to the one on the 9 steps of Scotch malt whiskey. It's just sort of a sample. Let me know if you can get it. You should be able to get it. I'll post it right now. So let me know if you guys check it out. Let me know if you can access that. I don't know if you can access that without not being a member of the group. I'm not sure. But that's sort of the stuff that I'm currently working on in studies. My hope is to finish this current study before the end of the year. I want to finish it by the summer, but this moving business is going to throw a little bit of a wrench into that. Scott Malloy says, or difference between X wine red casks. So that's a good idea too. I mean, get more into the nitty gritty. Yeah, I find X wine red X wine. Yeah, X red wine cask fairly easy to recognize. Not so much that you can identify the grape. This is a Cabernet Sauvignon, or this is a Pinot Noir, or this is a Malbec. I generally, just tend to get some red wine casks, and then visually, like if you look at this looks fairly golden. I really don't get any hint that was spending time in a sherry cask from the looks of it. But typically with a red wine cask, just from looking at it, you can already tell. In fact, in the Tomatin 14-year-old, which is aged in a port cask, the port cask influence is quite obvious. I don't know if you can see it that much. There is a slight red tinge to that. I don't know if you can see it on that. Yeah, you can probably see that. There's a slight red tinge to that, giving it away that it spent some time in an albeit fortified red wine cask. I don't hear too many whiskey people getting this much into the nitty gritty, I'm not saying there aren't, I just don't hear them, of dissecting whiskeys and trying to retro-engineer a whiskey to determine how it goes into it. And I don't even know if the Council of Whiskey Masters will go as in depth in the requirements as, say, the WSET or the Court of Master Sommeliers or the Institute of Masters of Wine. I don't know if they'll get that much into the nitty gritty. Blind tasting whiskeys and being accurate in identifying them, particularly say Scotch, is much more difficult than wines in a sense, because there's not as much things that are typical. Now with wines, it's more difficult because there's 1,500 to 3,000 different grapes and a lot more different regions and so forth. But they only put on a test that which should be knowable, depending on what level you're being tested at. So they're going to go classic regions for classic grapes. So Pinot Noir, they could put California, Oregon, Burgundy, obviously. At a more advanced level, they might put, they could put New Zealand. Although New Zealand, Pinot Noir, it's very difficult to tell the difference between that and California. But anyway, so they don't put obscure grapes coming from obscure places like Idaho or something like that. Muscadine, which is a Native American varietal, coming out of Idaho or some weird place, like they don't put that on there. So it's classic grapes, classic wines that should be readily available wherever you're at. That's what they typically put on test. All right. So let's get into our Tomatin quiz. We've been at this exactly just about half an hour now. Let's get into our quiz. Our Tomatin quiz is only going to be 5 questions. I like to do 10 questions. However, there's some things that are the same almost in every video, right? So most distilleries were heavily impacted by First World War, Second World War, Prohibition, and that kind of thing. So there's a certain time slot, 1914, 1918, the 1930s. Most Scotch distilleries benefited from the phylloxera plague because when vines were being killed in the 1862 to the end of the early 1900s, phylloxera plague was taking out vineyards throughout Europe, and consequently they didn't have any brandy coming out of France. Consequently, everybody was, for their spirit, there was going to Ireland and Scotland to get their spirit. Consequently, France is a huge consumer of Scotch whiskey. Just as that sort of similarity, everybody benefited from that. Also, similarly, everybody, excuse me, took a hard hit. First World War, Second World War, Prohibition, and the Great Depression. Alrighty, so let's get into our quiz. 5 questions. All the content can be found on the video that I posted last weekend. All right. The name Tomatin means A, to the mountain, B, hill of the juniper bush, C, mountain of heather, or D, hill of wonder. What does Tomatin mean? Does it mean to the mountain? Does it mean hill of juniper bush, mountain of heather, or D, hill of wonder? Now notice always have either some sort of hill or mountain in there. David Belcher says B. Mike Hassler says D, all the above. That was not an option. Donna Pass says B. I love the juniper bush. Is everybody saying B, 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 B? And the answer is B. Hill of the juniper bush. Hill of the juniper bush. So it's sort of surprising because you would think that would be a name they would use for a gin producer, right? Because there's always juniper in a gin. And as far as I know, Tomatin has never made gin, so I don't know why they use the name Tomatin, but it would be a better name for a gin producer. Alrighty. Second question. The Tomatin Distillery was founded in 1867. The dates are always the most difficult. 1867, 1877, 1887, or 1897. But if you happen to have a bottle of Tomatin, you can look at your bottle and it'll tell you right on it. So Christopher Malloy says D, Belcher says D, Jack the Pickled Hound says C, Antal Ten Brook says D. Everybody's saying D. Everybody's getting it. Either because they know it, because they have a bottle of Tomatin, or because they're following someone else who knew it. And the answer is D, 1897. So 3 years before the end of the century. All right, next question. This was probably, I would say, one of the most surprising things in studying Tomatin Distillery. I didn't know they made blends. I'm sure it came up during my tour of the distillery, so I probably heard it before, but it just hadn't stuck in my head. So what percentage of Tomatin Distillery's production goes into blends, and what percentage of production goes into single malts? Is it 50% blend, 50% single malt? B, 20% blend, 80% single malt? C, 80% blend, 20% single malt? Or D, 10% blend, or 90% single malt? And the shocking thing is Tomatin Distillery is a much bigger distillery with much more potential if they were running at full capacity. They're only running about half their stills. So physically, it's a much bigger distillery. And we got some C's, we got some D's. Good. So it's like it's between C and D. And the answer is C, 80% blend and 20% single malt. This really, really surprised me. So now if you ever see a Talisman, or if you see the Antiquary, you know where that came from. I don't spend as much time on blends. However, my eyes will be open. I will now be looking for these just out of curiosity. One, are they any good? And two, just to do a comparison between a Tomatin. In fact, maybe if I can find a bottle, I'll do a video comparing a Tomatin single malt versus a Tomatin blend. But I found that quite surprising. Was not expecting that. Alrighty, next question. In 2013, Tomatin Distillery released its first peated single malt called what? It's called A, Torfa, B, Balekin, C, Cabocan, or D, Peatheart. I actually picked up a bottle of this when I was at the distillery, and that bottle is now gone because I finished it. Antal Ten Brook says, oops, it's not the one I wanted. It moved. He says, the Antiquary 21 is very nice. I will keep my eyes open for that. Dave Belcher says C. Jack the Pickle Hound says C. Judith says C. Christian Muller says, and it was because they received an accidental batch of peated malt. C. All right. So the answer is Cabocan, C. So Torfa is a Highland peated from Glenglossa. Balekin is from Adradour. and peat heart is from Enoch. So these are all Highland peated, but only Cabocan is from Tomatin. So I bought it, and they have several different bottlings of Cabocan. I've had one. It was okay. I think the main thing with it is it seemed a little youthful. You get a lot of those typical youth. You get like that powdered sugar aspartame character to it. It was very fruity, tropical, and the peat was pretty prevalent. But some people like those notes, and if that's what you like, go for it. But I think I kind of tend to steer away from that a little bit. All right, next question. Tomatin Distillery is currently owned by A. Pernod Ricard, B. Beam Suntory, C. Takara Shuzo and Akura, or D. Diageo. You always got to throw Diageo in there. So who currently owns Tomatin Distillery? Do, 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 do. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. All right. One person says C. Lost says C. Vegas Art says A. Judith says C. Grubby Old Fart says C. All right, and the answer is C. Now, most of us probably never heard of Takara Shuzo and Akura, because as far as I know, they don't own any other distilleries. We're used to seeing, the French company Pernod Ricard. Of course, Diageo has a whole bunch of distilleries. Beam Suntory, of course, owns some as well. So I had to put in two, Japanese companies in there, but it's Takara, Shuzo, and Okura. All righty. So hope you did all right on that. A lot of the other historical things in the video is the increase of stills, the time ago they stopped producing, but there's sort of looking at different distilleries and going over the timelines, there's a lot of similarities. So what it would do instead, the way, if I were to do a quiz, I would say name 8 things over the last 150 years that shaped the Scotch whiskey industry as we know it today. And I actually have that on a flashcard. What are the 8 things? What are the 8 things of the last 150 years? Let's take it up to the year 2000 that shaped the Scotch whiskey industry. There's more than that, but I'm talking about major things. Phylloxera, I mentioned before, killing vines, killing brandy, made a demand for Irish and Scottish whiskey. 2, the Patterson scandal. I'm not going to go into that right now. The Patterson scandal. World War I, World War II, Great Depression, Prohibition, and one more would be, I would say, probably the rise of the single malts. The rise of the single malts in the 1980s. That's 7. Another 8 one you could put in there, I would say the development of the railroad. The development of the railroad. So in my Tomatin video, no, actually it'll be in my video on Oban. I mentioned that the train made its way from Glasgow to Oban. With the building of the railroad, it did several things. One, it enabled coal to make its way around, which means they weren't depending on peat as much for a fuel source. So it diminished the dependency on peat, and so you started seeing peat as a fuel source starting to go away, and it made coal more available. It also increased the ability So obviously to transport whiskey, so that whiskey could come from the highlands down into the lowlands, even be bottled in the lowlands, um, and so forth. So it was a major contributor to how the shape of the profile of whiskey, with the reduction of the use of peat, but also increase in the distribution of whiskey. Uh, Travel going up there, uh, the whiskey tourism industry, in terms of people going to visit distilleries, didn't start come around until the 1970s. Uh, I mean, there's probably some in the early or late 1960s, but they really didn't start until the 1970s and 80s. So a lot of distilleries, if you go visit them, they are, if you look at how they're originally built, they weren't built for having tourists coming in and out around them. Alrighty. So I really, really like Tomatin Distillery. I like the whiskeys. For me, and this is my preference, is they can have a whiskey that's non-choke filtered, natural color. The way in which I'm guessing it's got to be in the cuts. The mouth feel, they still have this creamy, round, silky mouth feel that you would have in a blended whiskey or something with some grain in it, and yet it's all malt. I mean, the malt really makes its presence known in it, and I like that. Even in this cast strength, it really really shows off really 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 well. Um, all right, I can kind of start to feel my throat going out, and I can hear my voice going out, and I'm sort of holding back coughs, keep myself from coughing like crazy. After I move in, I probably need to go see need to see a doctor, see an allergist or something, because this is getting ridiculous. I'm tired of coughing all the damn time. So, and I can't drink whiskey at work. So basically, it's all through the day at work. I got a pocket full of throw lozenges. I'm sucking on throw lozenges and drinking water. But all right. So my next few videos it'll be Glengoyne, Oban, and there's another one. My mind's going blank at the moment. So I already have it prepared 3 more videos that'll come out. I don't think I'll be following up those up with live streams. So the next one will be the Glengoyne Malaga cask, Oban 14-year-old, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the next one is. But anyway, so because all this stuff has to get packed up, I'll probably record those videos over the next couple of days. I'll upload those and space them out and so forth. But so I hope you guys have a great summertime. Enjoy the time off. Summertime gets to be a little challenging for whiskey tours because of the longer days. People are out playing. Now that COVID is somewhat in hiatus, people get a little bit more back to a normal life. So fewer people tuning in. So what do you mean? Jack Pickle, what do you mean you can't drink whiskey all at work? I would not be. I can drink coffee at work and stuff, but even if they allowed me to drink whiskey, which they don't, obviously, I would not get any work done. I would just feel very lethargic and not feel like working. All right, hope you have enjoy the rest of the weekend. Enjoy your summer. The funny thing is, once I get moved in and go live again, this probably won't look all different. It'll just be a different room. But in terms of the bottles and the shelves and all this kind of stuff, it'll all look pretty much the same. But I look forward to it. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching. If you watch this on the replay, don't forget to give a thumbs up to this video. If you have any comments, any questions, leave them down below. And if you're watching on the replay after about 24 hours, I'm going to try to put links to 2 videos right here, and over here. They'll be right here, so you can watch more videos from this content on the replay. All right, until next time, cheers.